We're live, Adam.
2, 3, 4. Hello, Paul. Good morning. Good morning. Good morning.
Happy Sunday. The initial inaugural edition of a Sunday Learn a Little.
Good morning. And in the news, good morning. Welcome, everyone.
These are a couple of guys that are really slipping.
Google that's actually a pretty good one. We use it regularly. Who is that?
Morning.
Ann Curry.
Welcome to
Ann
the
Curry.
news. Good morning.
Very good broadcaster. She wasn't ready for the camera.
Perhaps I should share that right now.
Someone put the YouTube
fun.
link in the comments. If you would, please share that value.
Absolutely.
Hey, man, how's it going? Happy Sunday, everybody.
Happy Sunday, everybody. All thousands that are pouring in here. I'm sorry you've probably been anxiously waiting to see us.
Gosh, but, not Friday, not Saturday. You got to wait all the way to Sunday morning and 10 minutes after that.
We got our friend Daryl.
Hey,
yeah.
Daryl.
Daryl's at home. Daryl's at home for once. He's been running around a lot for us all over the Midwest.
Man
what a guy. Matthew Brooks, what's up, buddy? Get a couple eyeballs here. Adam, I'm reading this ticker and just finding out that there's some sort of deal structure school we've been working on for some period of time.
You tell me. You put that ticker on there.
Yeah, that's right. I did type it in.
That's right. So we try to help people and help them learn a little about various things. We thought, why don't we pile all that together in one cohesive place for real people interested in real estate and the different avenues. So a lot of people get their area or their trick that they like doing. They have some success with it, but we have found folks really open some doors when they recognize all the options you can use in real estate. So we thought we'd put together a little deal, according to this, deal structure school. Am I reading that correctly?
Yeah. And we had our professional logo makers put the first ad together, so it's probably worth sharing. We spent a ton of dough on this thing.
A lot of back and forth, a lot of brainstorming sessions.
That's the one. So this is Adam instructing me on how to get them deals done.
I like the collar.
Keep an eye out. This might show up on your Instagram, YouTube, Facebook pages as an ad to somehow entice you to join us in class.
You know, in all the brainstorming we did, I didn't notice that you had the Andre Agassi hair tie in the back.
Yeah.
Hey, Greg.
It's, you know, if you eat enough vitamins, your hair grows really well. So
mostly the back.
Just in the back. All right. Well, so we've been rambling on here a little. I could probably get rid of these things.
It's important, June 15th, folks. So that's the important thing. Keep an eye out. We're going to share a little bit of info that will be covered during that time, just to give you an idea. And that topic is, Paul,
the difference between the lease option and the land contract. We get many folks calling either. Oh, good, Daryl. You know, we got one guy that appreciates it. Thanks, Daryl. So there's a big difference between the lease option and the land contract, but they're two important deal structures for you to get yourself some cash flow. Many times we're hearing from folks that they believe they're doing a lease option because they took some down payment money, but then we also find out that they're taking some principal pay down on each month's installment or lease payment. And in fact, it turns out that they've got it backwards. They're probably more so under a land contract. So we're going to talk today about 4 areas of difference between the lease option and the land contract. Yeah, we don't have any fancy.
I see him do that.
We don't have any fancy graphics.
Hey, who's this guy?
That kid behind you. That's great.
That was incredible timing.
Is that a ghost?
We'll leave him up there.
Is this Unsolved Mysteries?
So yeah, so 4 things, and I'm going to start with number 1. While everyone's distracted by this waving child. Number 1 is title, and we're not talking about the title of the document. So people say throw the title up at the top, and that should do it, right? If I want a lease option, I'm not tied into a land installment contract if I put lease option at the top. That's not true. What really matters is transfer of title and the details of the actual contract. So like Paul just mentioned, if you do certain things that you think are a lease option only, the various characteristics of your interaction with a potential buyer is what really matters, not the title of the document. And then top of title, is there a transfer of title?
Let me throw back in there as far as the title of the document. Now, even if you get it, you believe you've done it right, maybe even you paid a lawyer to help you, the ultimate decision maker on what that contract is will be the judge. If the folks living at your home put up the argument that, hey, I've been paying towards this, I've been paying this down, I'm actually under a land contract, and then some other things have to happen if they win the day on that issue. So you don't want a judge to have to decide for you on what the document is, and it doesn't matter, like Adam said, what the title of the document is. It's actually the content and how you're executing on those provisions. So carry on, Adam, about the title.
If you're kicking a ball around a field into a net and you say I'm playing basketball, it doesn't matter. You're playing soccer.
Analogy, bingo.
All right. So title of document doesn't matter, but title transfer is one element. And lease option, the current owner, the landlord, keeps title and gives you the option of buying that property, taking title at a later date. And that's lease option. In a land contract, title would actually transfer to the buyer, and so that's a huge distinction between the two. Even if that doesn't happen, if the other elements are met, you might be in the gray area of the two documents. But that's one important distinction, is whether or not title has transferred from landlord to tenant/buyer.
Right, and in that lease option, title remains with the landlord, and it's at a future date. There's going to have to be, usually it's a general warranty deed transferring that property when that usually a balloon event. It's not necessarily any. I guess there's a payment, but it's usually like, hey, we're going to give you 2 years to come up with the financing to take down this property. So under either of these, there's no title transfer. On a land contract, you will actually have the land contract recorded on the property. It's called equitable interest. So your equitable title. It's that since you're plugged in on the deed, you're sitting on the parcel in the recorder's site for that land contract, you do actually earn equitable title, meaning that you're paying down title. So eventually you're gonna take it over. So it's a neat kind of a neat deal where you're sort of like a tenant, but you're also like the landlord, the owner, and you're paying down title. So that's number one, title. Two things: title of the document doesn't matter, it's the contents, and two, title, who's actually still owning the property. Number two, Adam, let's talk about the obligations of the owner. You want to run with that?
Right. So the obligations of the owner, the current landlord, if it's just an option to potentially buy it at a future time, a lease option, a lease with an option. Obligations of the landlord is exactly the same as it is with any other lease, any other landlord-tenant issue. So look to your state's landlord-tenant law. You still have the same obligations of a habitable residence. Security deposit rules still apply. All those sorts of laws and obligations still apply. It's just you've thrown in there the option in the future within the lease to potentially buy it, for the tenant to potentially buy it. So really no change when it comes to lease options in terms of the obligations of the owner. If do you know the obligations of the owner on a land installment contract?
I do. Are you asking Reed?
Yeah, he's passing on that one. So maybe we should take it.
Yeah, I'll take that.
And then.
So good. Yeah. So the obligations of the owner under a land installment contract should be limited. You can actually spell it out in the contract that the resident. So in this case, it's a vendee. Under land installment contracts, it's usually a vendor, which is the property owner, and a vendee, who is the resident living at the property. You're basically giving them all the rights and responsibilities of a landowner. So they're going to do all the maintenance, they're going to do all the taxes, they're going to do everything as if they own the place. They're just not on title yet because you're holding a note for that. So a lease option, like Adam said, going back, the owner, which is you, the landlord, you're on the hook for all the statutory obligations, making it habitable, making sure there's water, making sure there's everything else. You can shove off a lot of stuff in a lease if you can get your tenant to do that, but you're ultimately the guy on the hook or gal on the hook if something goes wrong. Under a land installment contract, you can release essentially all obligations as the owner and put that on the person living on your property. So those are some distinctions there. Number 3, Adam, is the down payment considerations. Tell me more.
Yeah, what are those? Well, I'll tell you for a lease option, some considerations on that. One of the reasons lease options get a bad reputation is because this is abused, the down payment on a lease option. So the lease option is a regular lease with one additional term that says, hey, tenant, you have the option to buy this thing. Usually you set the price at the outset and you say what time frame that person has to buy it. And that's the only additional term that outside of a regular lease, essentially. And so in order to, there should be consideration for that option, but that consideration a lot of times is abused and someone takes, 10% of the future purchase price or whatever it might be. And some landlords say, hey, this is a great way to just, get a good payday and abuse that down payment. So it should be a reasonable down payment, a reasonable amount on the lease option. And then same thing for a land contract. You got to think about reasonable down payments, but you also have the 20% rule to think about on a land contract. And Paul, I'm going to let you get in there.
I'll run with that. So a land contract, you have a principal, and you typically have a principal and then interest payments, similar to just being like a bank. So let's say you have a $100,000 property that you're trying to sell on a land installment contract. A big consideration is in your state, there's usually a threshold of when that transfers from a forfeiture action to a foreclosure action. In Ohio, if you have a property that's $100,000, someone, once they pay 20% towards the principal, meaning once they pay $20,000 towards the house payment, they now have earned enough equity that the Ohio legislature believes that you have to go through the foreclosure process, so maybe they can get some of that equity back, similar to a bank situation. So when you're deciding how much should I take in a down payment from the person buying under a land installment contract, you want to make sure that you have enough space between the down payment and that 20%, so the resident can prove to you that they're going to continue to make payments for the life of that land installment contract. What you don't want to have happen is that you ask for 19.9% down payment, so $19,000 and $19,900 of a $100,000 land installment contract, and you only make one payment, and then now you have to go through the foreclosure process to repossess your property. So a little complicated, but if the buyer is putting more than 20% towards the purchase price over the life of the land installment contract, you have to go through a foreclosure instead of essentially an eviction, which costs a lot more money.
So in both cases, they should be reasonable. And just one additional consideration on the land contract is thinking about the future. You don't want that tenant to be above 20% in the first few months, 6 to 12 or whatever it is. So that's an important consideration. How much money from the lease payments going toward the ultimate 20% equity, and do your math on that. All right, number 4. What happens with breach and repossession? Touched on a little bit.
Yep. So I'll start with the land installment contract repossession. I mentioned that there's 2 routes to repossess under a land installment contract. There's a forfeiture, which is essentially a court ejecting that tenant from your property. So if they have paid less than 20% of the principal price here in Ohio, but I know this goes for most states that have a land installment statute. If it's under 20%, you have to go to court, and it's similar to an eviction. You say, hey, court, we have a land installment contract. You have your lawyer write up that, it was sold for $100,000. They only paid $10,000 towards the purchase price. I'm requesting a forfeiture. If you prove all those things, that they failed or they breached the land installment contract by some means, whether they did it for failure to pay, whether they did it for some other failure, maybe they didn't pay taxes or insurance or whatever it might be, that court will essentially ask them to leave and will order that and get that taken care of, and it's relatively inexpensive. If they've paid more than 20%, you actually have to go to your common pleas court and go through the foreclosure action, which means, it usually takes anywhere from 12 to 24 months to get done. It costs a lot more money. You got to spend more time with bozo lawyers and judges, and it's a little more complex. So an important thing to think about when a breach does occur is how much has been paid towards that land installment contract.
Good stuff. All right, so there you have a little taste.
What about the breach, Adam, of a land? What about the breach of a lease option?
Lease option breach. A lease option breach is essentially the same as any other lease. So as long as you haven't fallen into the gray area of whether or not it's a land contract as opposed to a lease option, you have a standard lease that's been breached. You go to the local municipal court and file an eviction action, whether it's breach for non-payment or some other breach. And you have your court date, potentially have a set out or work it out with a tenant to take possession of that property.
Yeah, and Adam had mentioned earlier about the reasonableness of your down payment for a lease option. If it's unreasonable, don't give judges a reason to not like you and to try to find ways to keep the tenant in the property longer. Even, we all think we're right, even if it's written really well by a lawyer that really knows what they're doing. It's really up to the judge on you getting your property back, in whether you get it back in 90 days or whether you get it back in 3 years. So you want to make sure that the person that's going to review that agreement, being a judge probably, if you can't work it out with your tenant, is that they think you are a reasonable person and not a jerk taking advantage of people that really just want to find a nice place for their family. So,
yep. And that goes for working it out in the court, as well as with a tenant who can do things like file bankruptcies and do other things to delay your eventual repossession of the property. So work out those details. A little more practical advice than necessarily directly legal or whatever, but play nice and things work out better.
All right, Adam, Joe has a question for you. Which one is better if you are the buyer or the seller? What do you think?
With the better one for buyers is a land contract, because it gives you that 20%, protects that equity you can build up. So if it's a lease option, all you're doing is buying the option to buy something later. It's if things don't work out, you don't get anything out of a lease option unless you get that purchase. Whereas if you're on a land contract, you could potentially get up to 20% equity in there, and that equity builds up, and you get something from that potentially in the future.
That's a good answer.
So
yep.
There's a lot
going on. If you're the buyer, we got people are busy. It's a nice day in Northeast Ohio. If you're the buyer, a land installment contract is helpful because, like Adam said, you're getting potentially equity protection. You're also getting all the responsibility of the landowner and pretty much hands off from the landlord, because as long as you're not doing any major renovations or improvements to the property, you basically just have to make payment, and you won't really, the property owner, the current property owner, won't really bother you too much in our experience, because they just want the money, and they're going to make sure it's not falling apart. The house isn't falling apart, but you're going to pretty much be the landowner. A lease option is better for sellers because it's nothing but locking in a purchase price, and you're getting a chunk of capital up front for it. So, and then you're able to treat your tenant, as you would any other landlord situation, but you're going to get a chunk of money up front, and you're going to lock in a purchase price, which, you can negotiate it, where if this, right now properties are about as expensive as they're ever going to be, at least it appears that way. So if the market dips, if you lock in a purchase price based on today's figures, you might be able to sell it for more than it'll be worth, 3 years from now or 2 years from now, whatever it is. So if you're the owner or the seller, a lease option is a nice option, because you can lock in a little more value on your property than maybe you would otherwise trying to sell it later.
And just to point out, the lease options benefit for a tenant in that situation. Tenants are protected like any other tenant, so there's some benefit there. If you don't want to have to care for the property in the way you have to as an owner, lease options allow that, where the landlord's still responsible for their usual obligations on a lease option. under landlord-tenant law. So there is a benefit there for people who don't want that responsibility but want the option to buy later.
Good. And Daryl's got another follow-up question here, and then we're going to leave everyone's Facebook page alone. Is there a dollar limit or a time limit on either one of these? No, not really. If it's a land installment contract, you can amortize these over whatever period of time. You can do them 30 years. You can do them whatever you want. The longer the amortization on the land installment contract, the lower the payment will be for the vendee or the person looking to buy it. So the longer, it kind of cuts both ways. You're going to get more interest payment if it's a longer amortization, or if you make it a shorter one, you're going to get bigger payments. So, but they're going to eat into that principal more. Time limit.
I just say that.
Yeah, go ahead.
The reasonableness would just essentially it gets back to whether or not it looks like a seller's taking advantage of a potential buyer in either situation when it comes to timeline. If you make it, you're trying to lock in a tenant for 10 years and say, I won't sell it to you until year 10 or 12 or whatever. That seems a little bit predatory.
Yeah, and in most cases, for at least in our experience for law, is that a lot of it is whatever's in the four corners a court will decide on. I feel like the only exception to that is real estate, because it is people's homes. It is an area that judges tend to have a soft spot on, which I don't necessarily agree with or disagree with. I mean, this is where people are raising their babies. So if you're going to be a landlord and it appears from a third party that you're a jerk, you're probably going to pay for that down the road. So keep that in mind when you're putting these things together. So.
Yes, sir. All right. Thanks, Daryl.
How do we do?
Great
Adam?
Class participation.
Yeah, Daryl gets some sort of class prize, bringing us the apple.
Throw him a Snickers.
I think that's a good place to stop, and I think a better place to stop is with this picture in the frame. So we're going to ask for some accountability from all you too. At June 15th, we're dropping this baby for anybody that wants to learn about deal structures, lease option, land installment contracts, syndication, traditional seller finance. There's all sorts of wild ways, membership, sales, all sorts of ways to take down.
The third option we didn't talk about in terms of a potential buyer and owner working together, lease option, land contract, and then note and mortgage is a third option we didn't talk about today, but will be covered in the deal structure school.
Right. Yeah, we've been doing a lot of membership sales too, which is an interesting setup. So we don't want to give that away, though. We'll do that later. So anyway, Adam, happy Sunday. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in. Chris, hey, we got another one. We got another live one. We'll share. Hey, Chris, thanks for showing up.
Hey, Chris. Thank you.
Adam, stay out of trouble.
Everybody. You too.
We'll talk to you later.
Bye-bye.